Holla ballers, it's Preachy, and we're looking at some good stuff today in the mail. Everything is flying in thick and fast. I absolutely love it. You guys are getting more and more involved every single day. Really makes my life a little bit easier because you're providing good stuff for me to talk about, and that's what's important. A couple of announcements is the next web show, which will be happening in 2 weeks' time, a week on Saturday, is actually going to be the web show where we hit 10,000 subscribers. That's right, we should be on target for that, for hitting 10k subs. So we're going to organise a little bit of a special show for you guys with me and Ghosty. There's going to be some giveaways, some prizes, all sorts of stuff, and the actual theme of the show is going to be memorable moments in your World of Warcraft life. Send them to me at preachgaming@gmail.com, and if you have any questions for me as well that you'd like to see featured in our mail, please send those also to preachgaming@gmail.com. But be aware, the 10k subscribers web show is going to be a week on Saturday. It's going to be pretty awesome, guys. We've got some good things in mind. Ghosty's been working hard. He tends to come up with the ideas for these. So that's going to be Saturday the 12th of May at 8 PM, okay? That's going to be the 10k subscribers. We should hit it then, and if we don't, we'll be pretty damn close anyway. So we'll carry on with the show as normal. So there's going to be some prizes and stuff given away. I'm not really going to tease you too much on that, but there is going to be some stuff going on. But please send me your memorable moments, please. Let's talk about it. We've had a few in already, along with your brofist. Just things that have really inspired you in World of Warcraft and made you go, wow, this game is different. First question comes in today from Zoop. Hey Preach, watching your stream tonight got me thinking that you could give me a few tips on guild recruitment after hearing you talk about method. Me and two friends recently started a guild to progress through Dragon Soul Heroic. We pugged Marchok Heroic, and after a few wipes we got him down successfully. However, to progress any further, we really need more members. We have 5 people who come to each raid, 2 tanks and 3 DPS. I'm sitting in Stormwind half the time. I'm online spamming for members, and if I ever get a whisper, half the time they can't make the raid times or don't want to join. We also made a post on the Battle.net forums, but nobody seems to be interested, and we got someone saying they were lying about guild progress because we pugged Marchok Heroic. Hence, it didn't get the guild the achievement. I was hoping you could give me any tips you might have to get like-minded, mature people that really want to progress. This is always really hard, especially now, okay? You're in this really awkward time, and looking for raid and stuff hasn't helped with that. I've talked about that in previous mails. People don't really feel inspired to do Dragon Soul Heroic, and can you blame them? The gear is pretty much useless. The gear is pretty much useless. And this is why I'm not too bothered about gearing in method either. The gear is essentially worthless now. It's going to be replaced as soon as the new expansion comes out. Very quickly. In fact, getting full heroic gear is probably going to allow you to progress that a little bit faster for maybe the first level or even the second level. Especially now gear has been altered in Mist of Pandaria, so you in fact get specific gear related to your current spec. No longer will we get quest rewards that are, say, healer quest rewards when we're playing a warrior, for instance. That's not going to happen anymore. Whatever spec we are, we're going to get tailored loot dropping for us. So loot is definitely out the window. And let's face facts, a lot of people are really motivated by loot in World of Warcraft. Why? I don't know. These are guys who've never really been in a progression situation, where they realise that if your guild progresses, big loot comes as a natural consequence of actually just focusing on killing the boss. If you put your focus instead on getting items and on killing the boss, guess what? You get a lot of loot anyway. It comes with what you're doing. So you're really going to struggle here, Zoop, unfortunately, because you're in this weird period where the loot is irrelevant. So those people who are interested in loot, a lot of great players are purely interested in loot. And if they're not currently raiding Heroic, then they generally can't be bothered. What they're going to be doing is trying out different classes, or maybe even simply taking a break from the game. Let's face facts, so many people have got access to Mist of Pandaria Beta. Diablo 3 is round the corner. So raiding live is actually dying really quickly. We see this at the end of every single expansion. It's nothing uncommon about this whatsoever, and you shouldn't feel bad. And it's actually impressive to see that you're still inspired to go on and try and clear the content. That is a motivation that will carry you a long way in the long run of the game. If I were you, what I'd do is stop focusing your attention on trying to fill a raid every week and look towards getting a guild ready for Mists of Pandaria. I would look towards trialing people who do want to come along every few times and come along and try and get some bosses down and find those, cherry pick those decent players that are out there. There's so many good players who just float around Orgrimmar or Stormwind and are just ungilded, or they're not raiding anymore, they're in a casual spot in their guild, and maybe they're looking for something a little bit different. In fact, one of the easiest, another way you could do it, and shameless self-promotion, is check out preachgaming.com. There's loads of guys there in the same position. They're organising their own raids amongst each other because they're situations where they're learning, they're becoming better, but in general they're looking for guilds, and because they never had the inspiration to become better, they're just floating around in this sort of void area. So these places do exist. You can find them. You'll probably find it occasionally in Storm, and you'll pick up maybe one person. So next week you've got 6 regulars to 5. And then a week, 2 weeks later, you might have 7 regulars, and that'll keep coming. So what you do is you actually say, we're looking to get ready for Mists of Pandaria Beta. We're going to be trying out a lot of people. And then out of those people, let's say we'll go and do some Dragon Soul Heroic and test you out. And there you'll see the people who are probably not worth the effort or maybe need a little bit more help. But try and look for some promise. That's what I always recommend, is look for some promise in people. Don't look for people who will perform on the one night you go to Dragon Soul Heroic. Look for somebody who maybe, he's not doing the best DPS, but you can see that he generally knows what he's doing. He's also not dying to the random crap. He's doing his job well. Maybe his DPS or his healing's not quite there, but he's avoiding all the stuff. He's playing the game properly. And then maybe throw some time and investment into helping that guy out. Because in the long run, if you do that, if you invest your time into somebody, they will eventually come back and they will help you out in the long run. I've always looked for that when I've been recruiting people. When I read applications, I generally don't look at what is your current world of logs, unless we're desperate for people. I look for somebody who says something that makes me think, this guy knows what he's talking about. If he focuses on something like he's not just, I can do damage. If he says something like, I was motivated by this mechanic of the encounter, I think, wow, not only does this guy know a mechanic of encounter, but he understands it. And I find that so much more important, because DPS can be trained and practiced and improved. Being able to actually cope with encounters and mechanics is something we really look for in good players. And that's what I'd really like to see guys like yourself doing, is looking towards building a guild in the long run and not the short term. Instead of thinking, well, next week we might not have the people, let's say that in 3 months or 4 months when Mists of Pandaria launches, then we'll have the people. We'll have some good motivated people who we've picked out of these floating void, the thousands upon thousands of people who are floating around in the game who just need a bit of direction. You've got to remember, people don't like leading. They like to be led. That's just a natural fact of life, okay? The guys want to be led, and if you're prepared to do that, think long term. Never, ever think short term in terms of what you're doing. Always look for the long game. And at the moment, the long game is getting ready for Mists of Pandaria. People are excited about it. People are motivated about it. Maybe doing some stuff on beta together. Get a bit of a community going. And then maybe invest your time in somebody you can see a little bit of potential in. That's what I'd recommend you doing. Really look to the long game, okay? The next question came in from the Anonymous Lollipop. I was wondering, what do you think? There's an Ellie shaman in my guild, emphasis on was. And he was saying that damage is completely based on class. And according to your video on the highest damage class, he should be low on the damage charts. But my brother has held top DPS in every dungeon raid I've been in, and warlocks are not in the top of the charts. Do you think that damage is based on skill or class? I'm assuming that your brother is a warlock. I get that from that message, that your brother is a warlock, and he was always the top baller. This is a difficult one because, of course, damage has some relation to class. It has some. Just as hammering a nail in has some relation to a hammer. However, if you don't know how to use a hammer, which is, again, is difficult, I understand, maybe not the best analogy, you're not going to get the best nails in, you know? They're not going to be flat and decent. Everybody's picked up a hammer and a nail at one point and tried to put something together and it's come out all wonky. You smash the nail to the side, it's all gone pear-shaped. Of course, it has some relevance to the class, but only if it's used correctly. Like any tool, it needs to be used correctly. And classes are just a tool. It needs to be used properly in order to achieve what's going on. Your situation with your brother is one that is often encountered in a lot of mid-level guilds. Is somebody is just consistently always top of the damage. And according to the damage meters of World of Logs, etc., they shouldn't be. Their class shouldn't be top of all these. Let's say on Ultraxion, we should see the Arms Warriors at the top. If they're equally geared, of course, we should see the Arms Warriors at the top. We should see the Warlocks probably about 4th or 5th class-wise, even if they're played really, really well. The problem you have here is a lot of people in the mid-level sort of guilds where people are moving on are often not competing against the same people in their raid. What I always said is, when I started my own guild, and I was ruthless, as I've said in the past, is ruthless with the recruitment process, I always pointed out, you are not competing with the other members of the guild. You're in fact competing with everybody in the world to be the best. You're not competing because people get comfortable, they get lazy, and generally start thinking better of themselves than they actually are. And that is extremely dangerous. Extremely dangerous. It's like tanks get this a lot. A tank that has no trouble with playing because his DPSs aren't that great will feel like he's the best DPS, the best tank in the world, when he's not really. You then put him against some big, hardcore, cutthroat DPS who want to tear that boss's balls off, then their tanking gets pushed to the limit, and that's what we like to see. What will happen there is your brother is probably a really decent warlock. The issue there is literally the other DPSs aren't that great, unfortunately. They're the ones that are holding themselves back, and your brother's doing really well. So that's the situation that where I've been in the past, is where I felt so comfortable with being a top baller that when I moved on and realised it's time to move on here, if this guild isn't meeting my needs and I'm super comfortable, then maybe I should move on. And then you go to a guild where everybody is a much better player, and wow, do you not hit the top of the damage meters anymore? No, you are not riding the top of the damage meters anymore. In fact, the other guys are. Class as a DPSer, class is only a factor when you're competing against very equally skilled players. Very equally skilled, and you generally only find that in the very top guilds. The very top. In the mid-level guilds, you will always have a class that shouldn't be the top DPS, being the top DPS, because they're generally better players. Simple as they're more comfortable with how their class works, they understand the mechanics ins and outs, and they certainly know how to abuse their class in that boss encounter. That's what's going on, because remember, when we do our workshops, we look at two things. One, does this guy understand his class? 2, does he understand how the boss works? And 3, does he understand how to use 1 and 2 together in order to really get the most damage out of his class? That's what's most important. So either your brother is particularly great at knowing his class and pretty good at knowing the way the boss works, so he can do number 3 really well, and the other DPSs are either struggling with 1 or 2. It's usually 2, because we generally practice our classes constantly, either doing 5-mans, leveling, doing any sort of other raiding. We'll get used to how our class does DPS as a natural consequence. Some faster than others, no doubt about it. But whether or not we've got the ability to understand 1 and 2 and then put them together to form the third element of understanding how to push our class together with knowing how to make that work with the boss mechanics, that's the tricky part, and that's when you'll start seeing the best of the best. And only when it's the best of the best will you see class make a difference. So the answer to your main question, do you think damage is based on skill or class? Now, a huge portion of it is based on skill. The huge portion of it is based on skill. Class should only be a factor when everybody is equally skilled, and that is almost never, ever the case. Never, ever the case. Even in the very high-end guilds, there will always be people who are worse than other people. That's natural. It's natural to be like that, okay? That is normal and it's accepted. But if you're in a mid-level guild and you're seeing things like warlocks being number 1 DPS all the time in bosses that you know they shouldn't be, then no, class is not a factor. Class is not a factor. It's generally a factor. If we look at a method damage log, we will tend to see what we should expect to see according to World of Logs. The Arms Warriors and the Fire Mages really high. Survival Hunters pretty high. Rogues really high. And then the rest of us all sort of falling behind there. That's normal. That's normal, and that's because all the players are pretty good. If you're below that and you're in the sort of... When I say mid-level guilds, I'm talking about guilds that are World 700. That's where the mid-level is. Everybody ahead of that has generally been progressing really hard for a really long time. The mid-level guilds around World 700 and below, up to the World 6000s or something crazy. Those are the mid-level guilds who are actually pushing to some sort of heroic element. So your brother has held the top DPS in every dungeon raid, running warlocks at the top of the charts. Your brother is a really decent player and he's understanding 1 and 2. Your Ellie Shaman, who has left, obviously, which is a sad thing because he's done decent damage, shouldn't realistically be ever at the top of the damage. So you want to, in fact, take that information. If you're a guild master or a raid leader and you're seeing classes that shouldn't really be top of the DPS, consistently being top of the DPS, that doesn't mean those players are outstanding. It actually means the other players need some work. So no, it's not based on class, okay? All the classes do relatively close DPS. It's all pretty close. The big thing about it is using the class properly, okay? It's a combination of the two, leading much heavier towards the skill, because if that player doesn't really understand how his class works, or how to use his class effectively in that boss, that's all skill based, okay? You can say it's class based because, yeah, we can cleave a little bit with this class or whatever, but ultimately, if you don't know how to abuse those mechanics, that's all skill based stuff. It's lining up your cooldowns appropriately for when you need them. All that kind of stuff comes into play, and that's all skill based. The class gives you the tools. It's the player that makes them work. Alright guys, that's me done for today. If you've got any other questions, send them to preachgaming@gmail.com. Alright guys, I'll see you tomorrow.